The weekend's hurried defence summit in London, convened by Starmer, presents a critical juncture for European security policy, and ostensibly the purpose of the gathering is to reinforce Western support for Ukraine in the face of Donald Trump's diplomatic manoeuvrings and increased willingness to engage Russia in direct peace talks. But beyond the strategic discussions, the structure in the invitation list for the summit reveals a deeper flaw in European diplomacy, the exclusion of key sitting leaders and a failure to adopt a truly unified approach. And it's that sort of patronizing use of power which actually caused the fracas in the Oval Office. It's being repeated again by Starmer in London for tomorrow. Despite the urgency of decisions and discussions surrounding Ukraine's security and the role of NATO, the failure to invite all sitting European leaders raises questions about the coherence of a European strategy. And notably, this oversight echoes the row in the Oval Office, where Zelensky reportedly felt sidelined by Trump's administration's independent negotiations with Moscow. And why shouldn't he? The reality is that European security is a matter of collective interest, and excluding key voices only serves to fracture an already fragile consensus. And it's schoolboy stuff. And Starmer and the British diplomats frankly ought to know better. It's a particularly bizarre spectacle that the outgoing German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has been invited, while other significant figures, including leaders from key Eastern European states, have been who literally border Moscow's aggression, have been overlooked at a time when Ukraine's security depends on the strength of a continental commitment. Ensuring all relevant actors have a seat at the table should be a given. If they want to come, if they don't want to come, that's their decision. But this is not merely a question of optics, but of genuine policy. Excluding leaders from these discussions inherently limits their ability to contribute to the solutions being sought. And the solutions aren't on the table. The solutions aren't known. And they could come from anywhere. The diplomatic absurdity of selective invitations becomes even clearer when considering Starmer's own recent visit to Washington, where he attempted to convince Trump of continued support for Ukraine. European leaders already scrambling to ensure US engagement should be acutely aware that division among themselves weakens their collective bargaining power. And the exclusion of key leaders only exacerbates these divisions and risks alienating potential allies in future negotiations. The Zelensky incident in Washington was as much about personality as it was about policy, and his frustration stemmed from a feeling of being deliberately sidelined. And the London summit risks repeating this mistake by excluding European leaders who, perhaps politically inconvenient to invite, remain crucial to a comprehensive and united defence policy. And Starmer is perhaps unwittingly echoing the same mistake by failing to invite all necessary participants to the London summit. A major driver behind this flurry of diplomatic activity is, of course, Donald Trump's unpredictability, and his recent pivot towards Russia, coupled with his reluctance to commit to firm security guarantees in Europe, has left EU leaders scrambling to reinforce their own strategic autonomy. Trump's approach to Ukraine has been one of transactional pragmatism, viewing support for Kyiv not as a moral or a global imperative or a political imperative, but as a bargaining chip in broader US-Russian relations. By convening summits in London and Brussels, European leaders are attempting to wrest back control of the narrative. And if these efforts are to be successful, they must be inclusive. Attempting to forge European security policy with only a hand-picked selection of chums risks undermining the very cohesion that is required to stand up to both Trump's erratic policy shifts and Putin's expansionist ambitions. There's a summit on Sunday, there's a summit on Thursday, and everyone should be there. Or everyone should be invited. And the solution to this problem is both simple and politically difficult. Defence policy cannot be dictated by personal political alliances or the convenience of diplomatic invitations, the exclusion of certain European leaders, whether due to ideological friction or political expediency or stupidity, weakens the credibility of the entire engagement, of the entire summit. A truly robust European security policy must be one that acknowledges the necessity of consensus, even among those who disagree. The invitation list for the London summit should have been broader, encompassing all leaders with a stake in European security, and failing to do so only reinforces division and makes European strategy appear fragmented at a time when unity is more critical than ever. As Starmer attempts to position the UK as a key player in European security, he needs to avoid the same mistakes that have just been made in Washington. Because it wasn't Zelensky who was making mistakes there. It was Trump and Vance. And the exclusion of leaders may seem a minor oversight, but in reality it reflects a patronizing, deeper failure to acknowledge that true security can only be built on inclusion, not exclusion. And one country alone doesn't have all the answers.